going to take you back to Tuesday of 2 weeks ago when we first started putting evidence on. The first part of the case that you heard was the Darnell Stewart murder that occurred on May 13, 2008. The first piece of evidence you heard was that 911 call, William DePaola's play-by-play in essence, description of what he was observing. You heard from Sergeant Lang, who stopped Andre Hankton literally blocks from the scene. You saw the videos, which I'm going to reference here in a moment. You heard from officers Dickerson and Poland, who matched Telly Hankton's print to the Mustang. You heard from Mr. Gagliano about Mustang parts. Then you heard about the identifications made by William DePaola and John Matthews of Telly Hankton. The video started out with the chase. You see going across the neutral ground, the Pontiac driven by Darnell Stewart and the Mustang making the tight turn coming right behind it. You saw the photographs of the video from the K&T store. You see Darnell Stewart bailing out of his car and the Mustang. Notice there's no damage to the Mustang at this point. You see Telly Hankton touch the door where he left the print, and you see Andre Hankton driving off. Now when I play this next slide, keep your eyes on the pole and see Darnell Stewart hit the pole when the Mustang hit it. Now you see the Mustang flying through the scene. Now you start to see the image of Telly Hankton by the pole after shooting Darnell Stewart, starting to make his escape. The other camera picks him up as he makes his turn from Claiborne down Louisiana, just as William DePaola and John Matthews observed him after the shooting. Then at the end you see Sergeant Lang's vehicle enter into the picture on his way to catching Andre Hankton a couple of blocks away. After the Darnell Stewart murder, we turned our attention to the history of Josephine Street. You heard from people such as Latoya Stewart, Darnell Stewart's sister, Anthony Commodore, Michael Anderson. You heard at the lowest level how drug sales go on in an open-air drug market. You heard Latoya Stewart, who was young, parentless, and trying what she can do to make some money. She was at the lowest level of this drug conspiracy for a time. You heard how for years the Stewarts and the Hanktons were friends. You heard that from Anthony Commodore, who was a little bit higher up on the chain, had a little bit more access to Telly Hankton in the drug supply, a little bit more sophisticated of a drug dealer. You heard from Michael Anderson, who told you how he was friends with George Jackson, Telly Hankton, the Stewarts, the Smothers, how he sold drugs every day, and he was actually taught by one of the associates of Telly Hankton, George Jackson, on how to go about making money selling drugs, even dealing with Telly Hankton on a few occasions, buying 9 ounces to a half a kilo at a time. You heard from Latoya Stewart, who explained how the drug feud started. Darnell's friends, Brian Broussard, Rodney Robinson in particular, Broussard, the nickname Pluck, bringing heroin into the Josephine Street area, not supplied by Telly Hankton and in competition with Telly Hankton's cocaine sales, and also the potential for increased police presence as a result. The heroin can't be here with my cocaine, and the feud starts. You heard about multiple shootings in the early stages of the feud of Broussard, Robinson, Reed, and Stewart. You saw medical records introduced by the detectives who investigated some of these shootings. January 15, 2004, of Robinson and Broussard. November 17, 2004, of Robinson when he ran to the 6th District Police Station with the gunshot wound. April 7, 2005, where Stewart, Broussard, and Robinson were shot. And then you heard from Jessica Reed about the Elysian Fields shooting when she was over at her sister's house and Jessie Reed and Darnell Stewart were there, and Jessie Reed got shot in the shoulder in 2008. You heard about the Darwin Bessie murder. You heard it from Isaac Skinner and Tillicus Irvin, who witnessed it as they were pulling up to their marijuana dealer's house. You saw Darwin Bessie getting ready to walk upstairs and he got shot multiple times by Telly Hankton. Latoya Stewart gave you the background of that shooting. The day before, Darwin Bessie had killed Telly Hankton's friend, Teron Jackson. You heard from the homicide detectives who worked the back-to-back murders and realized that they were related, that Darwin Bessie was a suspect, again. The feud showing its ugly tentacles, taking lives. The sawed-off shotgun. You heard from Officer Scanino, who did the traffic stop based on the tent. The cell, who found the gun in the back of the car. You heard from Sierra Lee about the circumstances of the arrest. You also heard Sierra Lee talk to you about Andre Hankton and her relationship with him before and after the murder of Darnell Stewart and how that changed Andre Hankton. You heard from Special Agent Ross. I've talked already about the barrel examination and the test firing. You also heard from Alvin Neal, who talked about conversations he had while in jail with Andre Hankton and how they were still looking for the rest of the people in the feud, kicking in doors looking for Jessie Reed. I would submit to you not only was that gun found, but also during the traffic stop, this gun was found as well. The stolen gun out of Jefferson Parish by Officer Scanillo. Andre Hankton was also in the Mustang with that gun. When they killed Darnell Stewart, Telly Hankton had run off with the gun he shot Darnell Stewart with. This was the second gun that was in the car with Andre Hankton. That's why Andre Hankton is charged in count 3 in the gun conspiracy. You heard from multiple witnesses with regards to Telly Hankton's drug supply. You heard from Adrian Mosley the volume that came through him into the New Orleans area, first through the Dillons to Telly Hankton, and then directly to Telly Hankton when he started dealing with him directly. Kilo after kilo after kilo, year after year after year. You heard from Travis Bradley and Damon Butler, who were sort of those mid-level dealers who used Telly Hankton and Kevin Jackson as alternative sources of supply. They weren't from New Orleans. Telly and Kevin weren't their regular sources of supply. But just like any business who wants to have multiple avenues to get what they need to make their money, if Travis Bradley's suppliers down in the Houma Morgan City area weren't available, these guys were available as an alternative when his other primary sources weren't available. The same with Damon Butler up in Hammond. When his regular sources of supply weren't available, Damon Butler could access Telly Hankton, Kevin Jackson for drugs when needed. We showed you phone records demonstrating links between Telly Hankton's phone recovered during Agent Burris's arrest of Telly, and finding the entries for Big Boy in contracts as recently as February of 2009 showing that Adrian Mosley was, in fact, in contact regularly with Telly Hankton for purposes of cocaine trafficking. Sam Dillon, the man in the gray shirt. This picture was found during the search of Telly Hankton's mother's house. You heard testimony from Adrian Mosley about the Dillons being the original people that he was involved in distributing cocaine with. Here's a link between the Dillons and Telly Hankton. Sam Dillon in the picture recovered from the Hankton household. We then turned our attention to the Reed murder. You heard from Aaron Smith, Telly Hankton's brother-in-law, who introduced Telly Hankton to his friend Walter Porter on June 10, 2009, a date that is certain because Aaron Smith went to jail that day. You heard from Detective Melanie Dillon, who took the statement of Hassan Williams when Hassan Williams identified Telly Hankton as the driver of the tourist. You also heard from Hassan Williams' statement about the background of the feud, and the feud not only involving Telly Hankton, but George Hankton, Cup Hankton as well, during that statement. You heard from other friends of Porter who all heard similar admissions from Walter Porter in regards to Jessie Reed's murder and Hassan Williams' murder. Brian Hayes, Gerard Fedderson, Haley Smith, all accounting for Walter Smith's bragging about how he had gotten his entry with the Hanktons, killed Jessie Reed, bragging about the murder of Jessie Reed. You heard Celeste Askia describe the meeting at Venetian Isles where she witnessed the payment of $20,000 by Kevin Jackson to Walter Porter and the description of the murder, 50 shots fired. Both Fedderson and Askia identified the Venetian Isles house. Askia actually drove the agents there, showed them how to get there, pointed it out. You saw portions of the rap video where Walter Porter is essentially praised, lionized, recognized, whatever adjective applies, for shooting somebody 50 times, for being involved in a murder that led to 50 discharges of bullets. You heard also from Sharice Fillmore and Gerard Howard. Gerard Howard, who said, "I'm hearing this rap video they're talking about. What is that about?" He acknowledges, "Yeah, I killed Tutu. That got me in with the Hanktons." You also had the ballistic link from Meredith Acosta that I will talk about in a little more depth in a moment. Hassan Williams' murder 2 weeks later. Again, Aaron Smith, Gerard Fedderson, Celeste Askia gave you repeated examples of admissions by Walter Porter about being the person who committed the murder. Actually, one of them, Aaron Smith, told you that Porter told him he kept using the same guns from the Jessie Reed murder to deflect the attention from Telly Hankton because by July 4th, Telly Hankton was in jail. To help distance Telly Hankton, the person that Porter was doing this for, the hired hitman, he even used the same guns, which is ballistically demonstrated by Meredith Acosta's testimony. You also learned from Detective Chambers that Hassan Williams died with heroin in his hand. You heard from Celeste Askia how Walter Porter made statements that he was glad that in fact occurred because then it would look like potentially some other unrelated drug-related murder. We then turned our attention to John Matthews' attempted murder on October 24, 2010. You heard from Mr. Matthews. You also heard from Bobby Baskin about buying the gun from Walter Porter that's linked to the John Matthews murder. You heard from Meredith Acosta. Again, you heard from Celeste Askia, Brian Haynes, Gerard Howard, Sharice Fillmore. Again, admissions about how he carried out that shooting, used the door as a shield, consistently with what Mr. Matthews described to you, couldn't kill him because he had a gun, ran out of there disappointed that he didn't finish the job off. You heard from Celeste Askia about going with Walter Porter to Bed Bath & Beyond to meet Thomas Hankton to get paid, and then ultimately being disappointed that John Matthews lived. You heard from Sharice Fillmore talking about how Celeste Skia used her Wi-Fi access to check the internet to see if there was a murder reported or not. Danielle Hampton, ask yourself this question. If Telly Hankton is not responsible for the Darnell Stewart murder, which also implicates Andre Hankton, why are they creating a false alibi? There's no other reason than but for it's a guilty man who knows he's guilty and has to come up with something to avoid being convicted. Finally, Curtis Matthews' murder. Jimmy Madden search warrants at South Liberty in the Oldsmobile Aurora that uncover not only these guns but reams, dozens and dozens and dozens of bullets that go along with them. You heard Celeste Skia talk about her day leading up to the Curtis Matthews murder, going to Baton Rouge, going to Cabela's, coming home. Walter Porter disappearing for a period of time and then coming back and saying, "Come on, you have to come with me. We have to go to the French Quarter. I have to get on camera so that I can have an alibi." Admissions to Gerard Howard. Then you also heard from Mesquia and Howard about when he was turning himself in, them going underneath the house at South Liberty, she getting the $11,000, 10 of which went to the attorney, she kept one, and Gerard Howard taking the guns, one of which ended up being recovered by the FBI and linked to the Curtis Matthews murder, again, the ballistic evidence from Meredith Acosta. There's a still photo, Jimmy Madden having a clear look, and that haunting image of Walter Porter's arm outstretched as he is pumping Curtis Matthews full of bullets. Is there any doubt Jimmy Madden saw what he testified to? You then heard phone evidence from Agent Burris and Agent Williams. Telly Hankton's contacts with Adrian Mosley, Big Boy. You saw the contact list, and they counted 117 contacts in the 3-month period they had the phone records for that time frame. Telly Hankton and Danielle Hampton, their phone contacts that demonstrated after she testified falsely at his first trial that she in fact didn't meet him on some random day in Audubon Park that happened to coincide with the Darnell Stewart murder. No, longtime family friend. Telly Hankton and Kevin Jackson, multiple contacts, disputing Malika Honore's account to you that they didn't really know one another, didn't associate with one another. Significantly, Walter Porter and Kevin Jackson's contacts, 239 in the 2-week period beginning on June 10, 2009, the day Aaron Smith introduced that man to that man. He gets injected into the relationship as well, and they start their plan as to Jessie Reed. More particularly, 27 contacts on the day of Jessie Reed's murder. 27 times Kevin Jackson is talking to Walter Porter on the day of Jessie Reed's murder. Then you have the cell location slides that we will get to. Here are the 3 pages, all in yellow, of Walter Porter's contacts with Kevin Jackson on June 20th, on one day, the day Jessie Reed is shot 50 times. From Special Agent Williams' presentation, you will have evidence of Kevin Jackson's phone at 10:16, 10:28, 10:21, and lastly at 10:34, if I remember correctly, all uptown, not at the Hilton Hotel where Malika Honore said he was there until at least 10:30. His phone is uptown. Kevin Jackson is uptown. You will see evidence of where Walter Porter's phone is at the same time. More particularly, Walter Porter's phone at the time of the 911 call and just before it. The 911 call is at 11:56. Walter Porter's phone is recorded being used as it's leaving the crime scene. Walter Porter is at LaSalle. His phone evidence shows it. The Nebben chart, the links. You have Jessie Reed and Hassan Williams in the middle with 2 guns used at both scenes, 2 of the 5 at Jessie Reed's murder. You have another of the guns used at the Jessie Reed scene linked to all of these shootings. The John Matthews shooting, the Bobby Biscuit arrest, that's the seizure of the gun. The Christopher Smith murder, and you have heard Aaron Smith talk about it. That's the Mercedes and Corvette murder where the car wash guy wasn't making the payments, and the 2 other murders that you heard links Walter Porter to that gun. You heard from Meredith Acosta as to the gun on the left. That's the Curtis Matthews shooting over there, linked to another murder that you have heard evidence linking Walter Porter to. Now let me talk for a couple of minutes. That was our case. That was what we took you through. I would submit that through our 2 weeks of our case, the 60 or so witnesses that we presented to you, I would submit that we have given you a comprehensive look and shown you what an open-air drug market looks like, how it's supplied from the suppliers with Mexican connections who live in Texas, all the way down to the street-level sales of people who look like LaToya Stewart. We also showed you what, unfortunately, is the inevitable outgrowth of such a place, the terrible violence when battles begin over valuable real estate such as Josephine Street. That's mine. You are not selling your heroin where I'm selling my cocaine. Get out. And we will do it by any means necessary. Darwin Bessie, Darnell Stewart, Jessie Reed, Hassan Williams, and George Hankton aren't the only ones affected by that violence. You will also see it affect the families of the Reeds, the Stewarts, and the Hanktons. But it also affects people like William D. Paola and Jimmy Madden. William D. Paola, who has come to testify multiple times, who was doing nothing more than driving home from work when a Wild West car chase breaks out in front of him, and he witnesses ultimately the execution of Darnell Stewart. Jimmy Madden, who had the misfortune of seeing someone blown away feet in front of him, but nonetheless stepped forward, despite all of the advice he got that evening to the contrary, and testified to what he saw and identified Walter Porter as the killer of Curtis Matthews. You also heard about a family that lost more than any family should truly have to sacrifice or lose. John Matthews, he not only lost his businesses, he not only suffered being shot himself 17 times, he lost his brother. Why? Because these guys will brutally and callously do whatever is necessary to enforce their will and their control over Josephine Street. If it threatens them going to jail, they will do what it takes to get out of jail. Perjury. Go ahead on the witness, as Telly Hankton told Michael Anderson to make the phone call to the Smothers. Go ahead on the witness, leading to John Matthews' shooting. I would submit to you that the evidence as it pertains to Telly Hankton is just simply overwhelming. There's been virtually nothing to contradict the drug evidence that we have put forth to you, be it Adrian Mosley, Anissa Mosley, his suppliers, to LaToya Stewart, Anthony Commodore, Michael Anderson, Travis Bradley, Damon Butler, who received drugs, bought drugs from him. You even heard of admissions by Walter Porter that he was looking forward to getting in on the drug connection that Telly Hankton could be. You heard Thomas Hankton's role being substituted for Telly Hankton when he was looking at possibly going to jail. You heard of the identifications of William D. Paola and John Matthews in the Stewart murder. Very early on in the case, you heard from William D. Paola, very clearly not wanting to be a part of this, but knowing it was the right thing, but confirming that he would never, I think in his words, bear false witness against someone. That's how sure he was as to his identification of Telly Hankton shooting Darnell Stewart. You heard about the false alibi scheme of Danielle Hampton. You heard from Michael Anderson about his statements and conversations with Telly Hankton about going forward on the W. Go get the witness. I'm in trouble. Why else do these things except to try and prevent the leader, Telly Hankton, from looking at an extended jail sentence? And then the supply to Josephine Street ends. The control and the money at Josephine Street comes to an end. You heard about the Bessie murder from Tillicus Irvin and Isaac Skinner. You heard about the multiple shootings of Rodney Robinson and Broussard and Reed through the years. You even heard of the threats to Daryl Nicholas, Frank Hankton's girlfriend, when Telly Hankton thought that she or he stashed his drugs at her house. You heard about the Reed murder with Kevin Jackson and Walter Porter, days after Porter was introduced by their mutual friend Aaron Smith, the phone records that I have already discussed. Hassan Williams identifies Telly Hankton as someone he had known. You heard from Detective Burns and Detective Dillon about Hassan Williams' condition, crying, upset, but nothing but confident that Telly Hankton, a person he knew, was one of the shooters. You have also heard in that same statement about Cup's involvement in the feud and the prior shooting of Jessie Reed. And finally, John Matthews being shot because he was a threat to Telly Hankton's control of Josephine Street. Andre Hankton. He may have at one point been a productive member of society, working hard on cruise ships. However, once he decided to team up with his cousin Telly and go after those in the drug feud who killed his brother, Andre Hankton became just like the rest, killing to eliminate those who threatened the drug control stronghold on Central City. He chased Darnell Stewart with Telly, mowed him down, leaving him immobilized so his cousin could finish him off. Listen again to the judge's instructions on aiding and abetting. Two people working together to accomplish a common goal. I gave you the bank robbery example of being a classic definition of what aiding and abetting is. Two people working together to accomplish one end. I would submit to you those videos give you a video definition of what aiding and abetting is. Andre Hankton running him down, Telly Hankton finishing him off, that's aiding and abetting. That's Andre Hankton's working with Telly Hankton to ultimately win the drug war against the Reeds and Stewarts. He aided and abetted his cousin in accomplishing the goal that began many years before with the shootings of the Broussards and the Robinsons. He showed he wasn't finished merely with his role in killing Darnell Stewart. 3 different guns recovered from Andre Hankton, 2 of them the sawed-off shotgun and the stolen gun out of Jefferson Parish, while he is on bond for the murder. While he is on bond, he is riding around in a car with those. Why? You heard from Elvin Neal. We are still trying to get those people. You heard from Sierra Lee, who went to the Jessie Reed murder scene. Andre is back in jail by that time, but what does she do? She calls Andre Hankton and informs him of Jessie Reed's murder the morning after. Why is that? Because he is a part of the drug feud now. He may have at one time been a hard-working man. No longer. He is part of the drug feud. He has inserted himself, immersed himself. Kevin Jackson, Telly's cousin, the cousin you heard often about as Porter was making his admissions as to who was the third person with he and Telly when Jessie Reed was killed. Telly is Kevin's cousin. That clearly they were in contact with one another. The phone evidence demonstrates that, but Malika Honore would have you to believe that they didn't have any contact. But he was nonetheless proud to be a relative of Telly Hankton. You heard multiple statements of Walter Porter to friends, Brian Hayes, Gerard Fedderson, Gerard Howard, Celestine Askia, with regards to the Jessie Reed murder. You saw the telephone and cell site analysts that I just went through. You heard evidence of the drug sales from Travis Bradley, Damon Butler, Washington McCatskill. You even heard Gerard Fedderson telling the story of when he went out to Venetian Isles, how they had the discussion about trying to convert powder cocaine to crack cocaine. June 10, 2009, the day of Aaron Smith's introduction of Walter Porter to Telly Hankton and the beginning of Kevin Jackson's friendship with Walter Porter, bonded by the murder of Reed and doing it with the one guy they both looked up to, Telly Hankton. 239 calls between Kevin Jackson and Walter Porter in the 2-week period surrounding Jessie Reed's murder, 27 on the day of the murder alone. Cell site information putting Kevin in the area an hour or so before the murder, starting at around 10:15, not at the hotel at 10:30, as Malika Honore said. Payments to Porter in front of Celestine Askia, multiple trips to Venetian Isles with Celestine Askia and Gerard Fedderson by Porter, multiple trips by Porter with friends to Kevin's car wash out on Chef Highway. Walter Porter, the friend Kevin wouldn't tell Malika about. I wonder why. Where to start with Walter Porter? I would submit the first place to start is remembering all of his multiple admissions he made to all of his friends. In particular, the one he made to Haley Smith when they finished the BG rap video that you saw portions of. Knowing some of the words that were in the video, Walter Porter told Haley Smith, "I just signed my own indictment." You heard about the payments both from Kevin Jackson at Venetian Isles, at Bed Bath & Beyond by Thomas Hankton, the admissions, even the splitting of money with Aaron Smith and driving a Mercedes and a Corvette in relation to the Christopher Smith murder. You see the cell site evidence of Walter Porter being around the scene of Jessie Reed's murder. You also have the Nibbin chart that shows Walter Porter's links to all of these shootings and murders. You may have been wondering during the trial why we were painstakingly calling all these crime scene technicians to introduce all those shell casings. We had to lay the foundation to show you this Nibbin chart. Meredith Acosta's work following up on all the shell casings taken in at various crime scenes show the links that show Walter Porter is the hired hitman, doing it for money, doing it for pay. Reed and Hassan Williams, two .40 caliber guns, were 2 of the 5 guns used on the Jessie Reed scene. Reed's murder, Hassan Williams' murder, 2 of the same guns used at both places. The Reed murder and 3 others, plus the shooting of John Matthews, are the ones that go off on the right. The .40 caliber gun retrieved by Gerard Howard and seized from Sharice Fillmore matches the Curtis Matthews murder scene. .45 caliber casings from Curtis Matthews also matched another murder linked to Walter Porter, Darrell Caldwell, as Brian Hayes told you. You heard Celestine Askia's account of the day of Curtis Matthews. Baton Rouge, Cabela's, coming into New Orleans, going to the French Quarter. You heard of Porter's efforts to obstruct justice on behalf of Brian Hayes and Gerard Howard with regards to Count 4. You saw the arsenal of weaponry, including the 2 guns that served as the guns that constitute counts 21 and 22, the felon with the firearm count. And then finally, the cell site information and the phone information linking Kevin Jackson and Walter Porter. On April 19, 2006, Telly Hankton killed Darwin Bessie. Why? Because it was a threat to his control over Josephine Street. The day before, Darwin Bessie had killed his friend Teron Jackson. That cannot go unaddressed, unpunished. On May 13, 2008, Telly Hankton and Andre Hankton ran down Darnell Stewart and executed him. Why? Because Darnell Stewart was a friend and an ally to his enemies Brian Broussard, Rodney Robinson, Jessie Reed. On June 20, 2009, Telly Hankton, Walter Porter, Kevin Jackson. The amount of shots here is, I don't know any other word but obscene. 50 bullet wounds to Jessie Reed. Why? For the same reason that Darnell Stewart was killed. They were on the other side of the war, friends with Broussard and Robinson. 2 weeks later, Hassan Williams shot 15 to 17 times, 30-some-odd shell casings, by Walter Porter. Why? Because he was a witness to the Jessie Reed murder and a threat to Telly Hankton's control. If he goes to jail, they lose Josephine Street. October 24, 2010, John Matthews is shot 17 times at least by Walter Porter and the identification of Thomas Hankton. Why? Because he is a threat to Telly Hankton's control over Josephine Street. If he goes and testifies and he gets convicted, the money and the control over that valuable piece of drug real estate is threatened and goes away. Finally, October 15, 2011, Curtis Matthews is murdered by Walter Porter. Why? Because he thought that was John Matthews. Why? Because John Matthews stood up and told what he saw. Punish those who have the courage to stand up and either challenge or testify to what they saw. What is a bigger threat to an open-air drug market and suppliers of the drugs than witnesses like John Matthews who will stand up and testify? John Matthews paid the ultimate price. Not only did he get shot, he lost his brother. Ladies and gentlemen, the Hanktons have controlled Josephine Street long enough. We have proven every count that we have put before you. After you hear the arguments and listen to the charges from the judge, we would ask you to return a verdict of guilty as charged as to each and every count charged against these defendants. Thank you very much.